Welcome to another edition of the Hawk Off the Press podcast. I'm your host, Gazette Hawkeyes reporter, John Steppe, and I am excited to welcome back to the podcast Scott Dochterman from The Athletic. Scott, thanks for joining me.
Hey, thanks for having me on, John. I really appreciate it.
So let's talk offense. There's a lot to dissect after a not so great showing in 2021. We got some insights since then. With Kirk Ferentz's press conference last week. Brian Ferentz is staying, at least for now. Looks like we have a three-way quarterback competition. Let's start with quarterback there you've got the incumbents, Spencer Petras, Alex Padilla. Joey Labus, I guess, is kind of an incumbent because he's on the roster, but he was on scout team. Sounds like he's really going to have a shot at this job in 2022, at least as far as Kirk is saying at this point. Granted, it is February and games aren't going to be happening till September.
Sure, yeah, we've got about 7 months before the
games start flying, and who knows what may happen then. But I liked hearing that about quarterback, because if you're Alex Padilla and you started 3 games last year and you were like, you're up and down, you're inconsistent, but why would you come back if it was just going to be status quo and you're going to be a junior? And then at that point, you never, you got to get to your career at some point. And I thought he did well enough to warrant that, especially in light of what, Spencer Petras has been given every opportunity to take this offense to the next level and really hasn't. I think he got better in 2021 than he did in 2020. He just didn't have the receivers that he did in 2020, which was, Brandon Smith and Amir Smith-Marset. Both of them were on NFL rosters all year, one on practice and one on the main. And so then to see Joey Labus get that opportunity, I think is essential for this team. There was not good enough quarterback play to warrant somebody being an incumbent starter. The year before was different. And even in 2020 was different with the pandemic, the lack of opportunity to compete in a spring practice, to, go through the summer workouts, to do the normalcy that you would in a usual year. So it made sense that, and especially the delay of the Big Ten season, you had to start Spencer. He was the only one who really knew anything about the offense. So that made sense. Last year, he had 8 starts under his belt. Down the stretch, he did okay. He had 9 touchdowns, only 2 interceptions in 2020. Completion percentage was low, but, they won 6 straight games. And not that he did a lot with it, but he did enough with it where you say, okay, it's his gig. But if somebody else looks better, go ahead. But it never really strayed outside that line. Now, it seems like everybody's going to get the same opportunity, and they really should this spring. I mean, Joey Labus should get first-team reps with the first-team offense. Same thing with Alex Padilla. Same thing with Spencer Petras. There are no transfer portal quarterbacks coming in. They sniffed around, never really worked out. So now that's the basically status quo. And then Carson May comes in the summer. I wouldn't necessarily expect him to walk in and start, but
especially when you look at, like, Padilla was saying right before the bowl game about how it really takes a year and a half to learn this offense, which we could have a whole discussion about too. So with that, probably a difficult sign for a true freshman to come in. But, Labus has had that year, and, I think it'll also be interesting to see what Padilla does. Now he has kind of a full off season after having that in-game action. And I think there's probably a higher ceiling for Padilla than Petras right now.
Right. And that's part of it too. The only quarterback that I can remember really coming in and being a factor in his first year, and he came in the summer too, was Nate Stanley. That he won the backup job very quickly, even over a 4-star in Tyler Wiegers, and then he beat him out later for the starting gig a year later. But looking ahead, Petras has shown you who he is, and he had a lot of opportunity. He has a big arm, and I think he's a very intelligent quarterback. I think he knows the game as well as any quarterback I've been around here at Iowa. Just that to me translates into he's going to be an outstanding coach someday. in this sport. I think he can really relay the game. He's really personable, as personable as any quarterback they've had. And so I think that's going to work really well, but you got to translate that to on-field success. And the Iowa kind of maxed out offensively last year. They got as much out of that offense as they could with him there. As you said, Padilla could do more things. Can he be more accurate? I mean, 48% is 15 percentage points lower than what you need from that job. And then finally with Joey Labus, there were enough good things from him in practice against an outstanding defense, one that led the country in interceptions, that had more interceptions than any other team or Power 5 team since 2014, that he merits that chance to go out there and do it. Because if you can make plays against a defense that other people can't, we were in Maryland, we saw, Talia Tagovailoa, and his backup throw 6 interceptions against him. Penn State's quarterbacks threw 4. Iowa State, Brock Purdy, who will be on an NFL roster next year, threw, I think, 3. So there were just so I think he merits that opportunity. What I would like to see is they go through the spring and you won't know the damn difference between who's starting and who's not. Take it through the summer. Maybe in August, develop somewhat of a pecking order, but let them compete until mid-August. And then if you think you have that necessary separation, then at that point, to define who the starter is. You don't really want it to go in the season, but I also think that at that point you should have kind of the short leash, especially if it's Petrus or even Padilla, because they've proven they didn't play very well. So don't really allow them to continue to not play well.
And with that schedule too, you can't really have a long leash. If you have a long leash, that can get rough when you're playing Michigan, Ohio State, those teams. So that's the other thing too, where, you can't get away with the quarterback play that they got in 2021 with this 22 schedule. And I think that's another thing there. I like that timeline too, where, there's also a good chunk of time in terms of development in between spring and summer, and that August point, maybe Petrus figures out what kind of went wrong in the second half of the season. It feels like it's almost a tale of two Petruses, because, he had a pretty decent first half, and then at second half of the year kind of took a dive there. And granted, he wasn't exactly winning any awards with the first half, but, it was, I think, 9 touchdowns, I think, to 2 interceptions, I want to say. Earlier in the year, I could have that number slightly off, but then it kind of, or maybe it was 6-2, but it was a lot better earlier on, and then it kind of took a turn for the worse.
Yeah, I think what we saw was you're just waiting. You're waiting for that moment where it all kind of clicks, and it never happened. Early on, when they beat Indiana and Iowa State consecutively, I mean, they were the second-ranked team in that game, each game. I mean, Indiana was ranked ahead of them, which ends up surprising, of course, at the end of the year when they didn't win a game in the Big Ten. And Iowa State had a very disappointing year for what Iowa State expected. But still, they won both games decisively. And the offense, other than one big play and one big series against Iowa State, it really needed to just get out of the way. Don't do anything stupid, win the game. And but then when they didn't play very well, I thought, against Kent State and Colorado State, that's when I kind of went, man, this isn't very good. And they're not running the ball either. And that was a major factor in all of it. But then they exploded it in Maryland, but they were obviously aided by an incredible defensive effort there.
You're getting such great field position because there's interception after interception after interception. It's a lot easier for the offense to work.
I mean, when their average field position is, the 40-yard line of the opponent or whatever, it was, it was something. And Maryland wasn't anything special anyway. But then, and then you had, the Penn State game was just a survive game. And then they made a couple, their receivers made a couple big plays, and Petrus did too. they were 6-0, second in the country, and it was like, okay, wow, this team's legit now. I mean, but they got to get better. And then, of course, they got a rude awakening with both Purdue and Wisconsin. Purdue was way better than I think people expected, or they really should look back and see what Purdue did all year. And they weren't that far off from winning the division, frankly. And so, and that to me is, and then of course he got hurt. And so it limited him when he was playing. But I really think that it's, throughout the course of the final month of the year, especially, I kept saying they just need to squeeze the last drops of ketchup out of the bottle. Just do what it can as best as it can, just to make this an edible, sandwich. And
I'm gonna be thinking of this as I have lunch today.
It wasn't a very tasty sandwich, let's put it that way. but then you saw what happened against Michigan. I mean, it was like a no armed wrestler out there. I mean, they just couldn't do anything. And so I think that's the image that the coaching staff needs to have. Is it's not that it's that far from Michigan. That was a bad game. Bad games happen. But I think what it needs to say is we can't have that. We've got, because sometimes your defense is going to give up a big player, 2 or 3. So you got to make sure you have a puncher's chance to at least compete. And they didn't have that last year. That was what cost them. I mean, because Purdue was winnable. With a good offense, it's winnable.
Yeah, Purdue, Iowa had its chances where the score looked ugly. But, if they changed a few of those trips down there, I think that was, the 4th and 1 there. That was at the 10 or the 9. Yeah. And that's, when you don't convert that, it's hard to win games.
Yeah. And I mean, some games you look back and you can say the what ifs, and they're likely. I'm not going to say Iowa should have won that game because Iowa didn't deserve to. But what I'll say is if they would have converted a short field goal, which was, his worst miss of the year, if they would have, 3rd and 1, 4th and 1, been able to convert that with a quarterback sneak or some other play, if he wouldn't have thrown 4 interceptions in that game, it could have been different. And I'm not even saying the outcome, but the score and the tone of the game would have been different. Wisconsin was all about mistakes. They dropping the ball on the goal line is not going to be a winning strategy against the Badgers. No. And being a 5th-year player, a backup punt returner, dropping a fair catch is not a winning strategy in your own part of the field. When your team is when your defense is battling its ass off and it's holding Wisconsin as best as it can, goal line stands, and then, running 2 fullback dives on 3rd and 1 and 4th and 1. It's just, you're not giving yourselves a chance either. And your coaching staff doesn't trust the offense to do anything other than sneak the ball in this, this narrow area. And you're doing it against the teeth of a really good defense.
And, everyone, I think, knew what that play was going to be on 3rd and 1 and 4th and 1. Everyone in Camp Randall, and that can hold a lot of people. And when you have the offensive line where, okay, hey, everyone knows this is going to happen, but we're still going to outpush you on the line of scrimmage. That's one thing. But at that point in the year, that offensive line was not what it ended up being against Kentucky, where I think Kentucky, the offensive line had pretty good day, I thought.
Had a really good day. I mean, it looked the part finally.
Yeah, and it looked like an Iowa offensive line.
They ran the ball. Now, Kentucky did have some really good players out, so that was a factor. And Wisconsin does have, statistically had the best defense in the country. So that's another thing. It's debatable whether Georgia was better, but the statistics are the statistics, and we saw what, when Leo Chanel and stuff was out there. But that was a game going into it. I thought it was going to be 13-10, and it should have been 13-10, and one way or the other. And instead, dropping the ball, and then, 3rd and 1, 4th and 1, and and even at that point it was 20-7, and they were on the Wisconsin side of the field, and they had some momentum building. They had that chance, and and I'm not gonna do any kind of revisionist history on either of those games because they deserve to lose them both. But I do think that the opportunities were there to have a much closer outcome than what we saw, and that's what they need to do. They need to look at this offense and critically evaluate it. You can't just evaluate it for what you want it to be. You have to evaluate it for what it is. And what it is it's ranked in the hundreds in every single freaking category in the country. And it's from, and some of it's going to get better just because your offensive line will improve. But some of it's not because your scheme, your concepts in the passing game are archaic in some ways.
Yeah. Well, regardless of, you could have an all future NFL offensive line, but when you have your quarterback having the completion numbers that Petras and Padilla had, it's hard to win games that way. And I think I think you can have a run heavy, and I think you probably should, especially with the 2022 personnel, have a run heavy offense that, uses Potobaum at fullback, even with the rest of the world not really going very fullback heavy. I think you can still do that, but do it in a way that is more effective and, puts maybe a little less pressure on the quarterback. Because if it's going to take a year and a half to learn the offense, really, you could make a good argument, inhibits a little bit of the ability, say in the transfer portal, for somebody to come in and succeed when they see, it's well documented that Padilla said that it takes a year and a half, and, Padilla wasn't shattering any earth with that statement. It was kind of common knowledge already before that it's a learning process there. And, if you don't have such a heavy burden, I guess you'd say, pre-snap on the quarterback, maybe you can get some new talent coming in and be a little more competitive in the transfer portal.
Yeah, those are all good points, because the thing is, they're making it more complicated than it needs to be. I mean, and especially for the performance that you're receiving out of the entire offense, but especially in the passing game and at quarterback, when you're putting that much of a burden, as you said, or that much responsibility on the quarterback and pre-snap to look and call and determine all these different things, and you're not getting any kind of success out of it, then you've got to look internally and say, this is just too complicated. We can just simplify this offense and make it, go a little bit easier. And I agree that the foundation of Iowa football doesn't need to change at all. I mean, I think the zone scheme, it works at the NFL. You just got to make sure you update it to accompanying the times. I mean, some of the things that, number one, they really have legislated against like cut blocking in the NFL or in the college football. So you've got to make sure to, how do you get better angles out of that and not get caught if you do cut block. And then in the passing game, you've got to make sure that players can find ways to get open, because sometimes they're not. I mean, well, it's obvious they're not. And then the other thing is, and this goes to recruiting and coaching. When you have a passing game or a run game like Iowa and an offense structured like Iowa, if you don't have a quarterback who can scramble on 3rd and 6 and pick up 8 yards, then you better have somebody who completes 65% of your passes and to extend those third down into firsts and extend those drives and score points in the red zone and do all those things that they didn't do. And they haven't had a quarterback since CJ Beathard in 2015 hit 60% this season. Nate Stanley did a lot of really good things, and in the red zone, you're not going to find better numbers than him. In his 3-year career, he was 47 touchdowns and 1 interception. We all remember the interception.
With Penn State and a 6-point loss, but still, that wasn't all on him.
But last year it was 4-2. I mean, come on, man. And you've got to execute when you're down there. And so when you throw all those things in there, they've got to figure out a way. What are the primary statistics you want to generate out of this offense? And to me, number one is, at minimum, you need 4.2 yards per carry.
Yeah.
And like in 2020, they're at 4.6. And Brian Ferentz has told me before, look, if we can get 4-5 on up, we feel like we have a championship caliber team, and that's true. That year they did. Their quarterback play wasn't very good, but the rest of the offense and then of course the defense was even better than last year's unit. Yeah, outstanding. But then you go from that to you got to hit that number. You got to hit plus 60% completion percentage, and then you do have to have some kind of, it's 3rd and 6, nobody's open. Somebody needs to pull down the ball and try to get that first down. And I think on roster, Petrus can't do that.
No, he said after the Citrus Bowl about trying to get a little more mobile, but it's hard to, he said earlier in the season that he's no Lamar Jackson. You don't really become Lamar Jackson overnight.
Yeah. Oh yeah. He's more Tom Brady.
Yeah.
But and I'm just mean that in his speed, not any other part of his game. But you still got to, those opportunities are there. You still got to take them. You still got to get there. And Padilla can do it. And I've heard Lavis can do it. So that to me says you've just got to get more out of that. And then I think there are other, ways. I think they've got, an improving receiving core. It's not
helps when you have Laporta back too.
Yeah. And if you get Luke Lachey on a way up, you might have the best duo in the country. And Laporta is probably one of the best 3 tight ends in the country going back this year. Rock Bowers in Georgia and Michael Mayer of Notre Dame are up there, but I'd put him probably number 3, and that's saying a lot. So you do have a security blanket. You got to get more out of some of your players in the receiving core. They don't have, getting Charlie Jones back, to me, that was huge, because now with Charlie Jones, what I'd ask him to do is do more. He made big plays when he was out there. He just didn't play a lot because he was still kind of concentrating on, special teams and so they've got to figure out the difference is, do you pull him from a special teams unit, or do you leave him out in all of them and then continue to play him a lot more in offense? Because I think right now the offense can use him a little bit more, and maybe it's kick return. I maybe look at somebody else in that role, even though Charlie can do it, obviously did it really well.
Yeah.
But punt return, you got to keep him out there. He's too good there. But I would say kick return, unless he's like, hey, I can do it all. And let him give
Which credit to him if he can.
Yeah.
So
right. And so you just got to get him more involved in the passing game, I think, at this point.
Yeah, because he kind of checks all the boxes in terms of what you're looking for from a starting wide receiver. And I think if you have him on one side and you have Keegan Johnson on the other side, Keegan made a lot of big plays as a true freshman. Of course, drops were occasionally an issue there. So, there's still some work to be done for him. But, he gets this full off season after seeing significant time. And I think that would be an interesting, I think that wouldn't be a bad 2 options there. I mean, out wide and then slot, you've got Reganey coming back. I think Arlen Bruce could be really effective. I think now they have a better sense of Arlen Bruce, what he can do. You could see a little more of some adjustments in terms of focusing certain things around his skill set. I've heard a couple times the Deebo Samuel comparison, and there is a little bit of it that I see in him.
They ran 11 personnel about almost 60% of their pass plays, which is down a little bit from the previous 2 years, but I think that's because they have good tight ends. And then at about close to 24%, 25% of their running plays were 11 personnel. So you're going to have you need 3 wide receivers on the field a lot of the time, more than the other, groupings with that. So I think in some ways what you need to do is you need to incorporate Arlen Bruce, and you need to find a way to involve Nico Reganey and use his skill set more. And that's been a real issue too, to me, is last year he was targeted a lot, but he only caught like 50% of his targets. So you've got to make sure you get him the ball in an area where he can do something with it. He doesn't have blazing speed necessarily, but he has pretty good hands for the most part. He did drop some passes more, but he can get open in short space. And And then that also goes to the accuracy of the quarterback as to how he can find him and utilize him in that position, because, Nate Stanley did a nice job of that, in 2019 when Reganey was a freshman. So I think really if you incorporate those four and then leave room for one more, whether it's a Deontay Bynes, if he can make that, a Jackson Ritter played some, Brody Brecht, if he can come in and do something, Jacob
Which would be really impressive for him, considering also playing baseball in the spring. That just being able to pull off 2 Division I sports at once kind of amazes me with him.
Does. So we'll see how long that lasts, but but still, leave room for one more, because you never know about injuries and you never know about just somebody ascending. So I think all of that can be reshaped. And Tyrone Tracy fell from 1 to 5 last year, and which was quite a shame, but I think they have room for one more. Just all right, it's open. And then, but I really like the combination of Jones, Johnson, and Bruce. I think that could be a really solid formation going forward. I like what Bruce can bring, as you said, is kind of a versatile threat in the slot, running jet sweeps. He did a nice job and reverses and jet sweeps. I wouldn't rule out him at some sort of wildcat quarterback, because he played that at Olathe North before he came here. So, I would just make sure to get as much out of him as you can. He's a smart kid, and
Cam has a running back mentality to him, where he was talking about growing up playing the EA Sports NCAA football games, and said that his road to glory kind of character, for the people who aren't familiar with this game, it's the EA Sports game that they used to have every year before NIL kind of changed that. And Road to Glory was where you create your player that goes through the recruiting process and then goes on. He picked a running back. So, and you kind of see it in him a little bit when he's on the field, where, he's a little bit of a running back at heart.
Yeah, and he saw himself as more of a wide receiver at the next level, that he could get to the next level more as a wide receiver. But what we're seeing in skill position players, both sides of the line of scrimmage, frankly, is more versatility and more players who can do more things, because don't just put this guy in this box and let him do his thing. And it's basketball's been doing this for 30 years, and that is just let the guy go play. And I think and a lot of most teams outside of Iowa do that. Iowa's been very regimented over the years on both sides of the ball, until they flipped to cash in 2018. And then now you got a guy like Bruce, and I thought Tracy fit that role too. It's just now a matter of letting him take that next step. But you also have to have a quarterback on the field who can allow that to happen, and not just but with Petrus, when they would go wildcat, he'd either come off the field or he'd go to the side, and he's no target. So now, and I don't mean to demean Petrus. I just think that
no, he recognizes it, I think, as much as anybody, and he's joked about it himself, during the season. So right. I think he's well aware.
Yeah. So, and so you got to have somebody who can maybe go out for a pass. And once in a while it's there, throw it. They've tried one, pitch pass, of course, with Gavin Williams throwing it to Monty Pottebaum against Michigan, which was wide open, but, probably not the best choice of receivers at that point, even though I think Pottebaum is outstanding. Use check type of fullback. That was probably not the best route for him to run, and wasn't the easiest pass to come out with.
No, it was close. That would have been a hell of a play if, that worked.
Yeah.
But right. It was just a bit off on that one.
Yeah, exactly. Put it in a spot where he can make the catch. That's probably the key right there.
Yeah. So we'll see what maybe comes in next year with that. So, because then Michigan pulled one of those, and that worked. So if you have the right personnel there, maybe that would have been a little bit of a different result. But
yeah, right.
Yeah.
Well, Michigan's going to be interesting, losing both coordinators. So,
oh yeah. They still have their head coach, so won't be heading to the Vikings. So I don't know if, for us as fans of two of the three other NFC North teams, whether that's good news or bad news for our teams, but
it depends on if number 12 is still lining up for the green and gold.
yeah, that'll be interesting. I haven't been alive for a time where the Packers didn't have Brett Favre or Aaron Rodgers. So, which is probably making me feel very young here with that.
Well,
but
I'll take it all the way back to I was still in high school when it wasn't Brett Favre or Aaron Rodgers.
That makes me feel a little less young.
92 was when I guess I graduated in 92, and then in early 92 was when he stepped in against the Bengals and for Don Mikowski or whatever, and then it's been either Favre or Aaron Rodgers. So yeah.
So we'll see what that looks like in 2022. That might be a little ugly there. So yeah, you may love that matchup. Pun very much intended there, between the Packers and Bears, more than you probably have in a long time.
Yeah, all right.
All right. So we're getting a little off task here. So thanks again, Scott, for joining the Hawk Off the Press podcast.
Yeah, thanks again for having me, John, and hope your winter is going well.
Thank you. You as well. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in to another episode. I'll be back with another episode next week. Until then, we will talk Hawks later.